All right, good evening. Good to see everyone. We still have a lot to get through, as usual. If the outside noise gets too loud, just feel free to shut the windows. Just a little stuffy in here when we started. So, last week, we didn't get through a lot last week. We basically talked about Jacob's marriages and his children. So today, I'm hoping to talk about Jacob's flight, a wrestling match, and heading home. We'll see if we can cover all that. Some of it's going to be quicker. We're going to be in the book for some of it to recap some things. But that's hopefully what we'll get to. So why don't we just open up in prayer and get started. Lord, we thank you for this day. We thank you for the beautiful weather and just everyone who was able to make it out tonight. Lord, we pray for those who are not here because of sickness and injury. Just pray you'd be with them. Bring them back soon. We just thank you for this time that we can spend in your word. Pray you'd be with us as we study it. In your name, Jesus, I pray. Amen. All right, so, general question. Where are we at with Jacob so far? Do we like him? Is he a good guy? How do you compare him with some of the people we've studied so far? The jury's still out. Okay. Keeping an open mind. That's good. Not sold yet. Okay. Does he have any good qualities? Yeah, he's a mixed bag, for sure. But God is doing something, and we're hopefully going to see more of that tonight. All right, so we're going to start in Genesis 30. Now, we discussed most of Genesis 30. So where we left off last week was him having a whole bunch of children between his two wives and the two different servants. So he has a bunch of kids, and I want to spend just a very short period of time discussing Jacob's wealth, because he's been blessed as far as children go. God told him, that promise to Abraham, descendants as numerous as the sand on the seashore. So he's starting that, but now he's going to actually start gaining material wealth because he left his homeland with nothing, even though he was set to inherit the promises of his father, the wealth of his father. In the country with Laban, he's just a farmhand. He's just a servant. So I just want to read actually 3 verses to start with. I'll get some thoughts on it, and then we'll look in the book for an explanation. All right, so Genesis 30, verse 25. And it came to pass, when Rachel had borne Joseph, that Jacob said to Laban, "Send me away, that I may go unto mine own place and to my own country. Give me wives and my children, for whom I have served thee, and let me go, for thou knowest my service which I have done thee." And Laban said unto him, "I pray thee, if I have found favor in thine eyes, tarry. For I have learned by experience that the Lord has blessed me for thy sake." And he said, "Appoint me thy wages, and I will give it." All right, just a few verses. What do you think about that exchange? Yeah, it benefits Laban for him to stay. So he's worked 14 years in total. Do you get the impression he's not really being paid all that much? Yeah, so he agreed to work for the daughters. And I'm not saying he owned nothing besides that. But it's at this point that he says, okay, yeah, what do I need to pay you to keep you here? Which, as an employee, they always say is not a good thing to do. Once you give your notice, if they try to raise the bar, you still should leave. They should have been paying you that to begin with. Just some professional advice. Hopefully no one on the internet finds that and decides to make a major life decision. I don't want to spend too much time on this because that was more of a joke. However, it's very dangerous to do that. If you aren't willing to take the other job, it's dangerous to bluff. The problem is once your employer knows that you are leaving for more money, now they know you can be bought. So they don't have that much confidence in you even if they keep you. And if you're leaving for another position, that means that the position you are working now, you should be getting paid more. And they haven't been recognizing you and will only up your salary in order to not lose you. So they will only give you they'll give you the least amount they possibly can to keep you on board. But that's not the point of this time. So that was on me. I veered off topic. Okay. Anything else about these verses? It was just a few. Doesn't have to be anything. Yeah, Abraham was like the true nomad, and he traveled more around the Promised Land too. But it is interesting that, so Abraham goes from Haran, the Chaldean area, to the Promised Land. Isaac, the child of promise, never leaves the Promised Land, and then Jacob goes from the Promised Land to Haran, and then he'll eventually come back. Yeah, it's not close either. Not by that day's standards. All right, why don't you turn in your workbook to page 107? We're just doing this for the sake of getting through large quantity of text. This explains it well. And we'll look a little bit at that text. All right, top of the page, somewhere around the top of the page, paragraph starts with, after Joseph's birth, Jacob started thinking about returning to the Promised Land. He told Laban to let him go, and Laban asked Jacob what he should give him, since Jacob had been instrumental in the exponential growth of Laban's wealth. Joseph asked for, now we didn't read this, and that should actually be Jacob. Jacob asked for the irregularly colored goats, black and multicolored, and sheep, speckled and spotted, that would be born from Laban's flocks. Laban agreed, giving Joseph charge over the only regularly colored animals. Yet the regularly colored animals bore irregularly colored animals. When Laban changed his agreement, the opposite happened, and Jacob still prospered. Jacob's prosperity didn't make Laban's sons very happy. They reported to Laban what was happening. As a result, Laban became unfavorable toward Jacob. All right, that's a quick overview. Did that make sense? So Jacob, for his wages, in a sense, he's not just getting a paycheck. It's the miscolored animals among the flock. So they would typically be considered of like lesser value. You would want something more just pure as opposed to these spotted, speckled animals. So he asks for these lesser animals as his pay. And this way, Jacob, even though they're not as valuable, he can start building his own flocks and cattle. Now,
so he was paid nice by doing this.
Yeah, it's modest. Yeah, for sure. Now, I do want to look at just a little bit of what Jacob does here, because it's strange, but it's interesting. Genesis 30, verse 37. And Jacob took him rods of green poplar, and of the hazel and chestnut tree, and pilled white strakes on them, and made the white appear which was in the rods. And he set the rods, which he had pilled before the flocks, in the gutters, in the watering troughs, when the flocks came to drink, that they should conceive when they came to drink. And the flocks conceived before the rods, and brought forth cattle, ring-straked, speckled, and spotted. Jacob did separate the lambs, and set the faces of the flocks towards the ring-straked, and all the brown in the flock of Laban. And he put his own flocks by themselves, and put them not unto Laban's cattle. It came to pass, whensoever the stronger cattle did conceive, that Jacob laid the rods before the eyes of the cattle in the gutters, that they might conceive among the rods. But when the cattle were feeble, he put them not in, so the feebler were Laban's, and the stronger Jacob's. And the man increased exceedingly, and had much cattle, and maidservants, and men servants, and camels, and asses. All right, that's an odd little paragraph. What do you think of it? Do we understand sort of what's happening? Yeah, so it's an interesting thing that he's doing, because he's taking different kind of branches and like notching them out so that they're miscolored, because they're not like, they're sticks, they're not the normal color of cattle, and then he notches them out so they're like spotted. And as the animals are coming to the watering trough, basically if they were strong animals that he wanted to breed more of, he would put these rods in the water so they see them as they are reproducing, and they would reproduce speckled and spotted, which would be his. And if they were like the weak animals coming, he just wouldn't do that. And then when they would conceive, they would give birth to weaker animals, but they were, whatever color they should be. So Jacob ends up with these stronger, bigger, miscolored animals that are his. Laban ends up with lesser quality animals, even though they are of the right color and everything. Now, you might think, how on earth is that happening? Sort of. You could say that. So looking it up, there is no good scientific explanation for what's happening here. Now, there's a few things, and you can go whichever way you want with it. One commentator was saying basically, maybe this is some ancient breeding practice that we just don't understand. Now, to me, it sounds more like an old wives' tale. I'm not saying the story is. I'm saying his method that Jacob is using in the ancient Near East is that kind of like, oh yeah, if the animal breeds looking at something spotted, then the resulting animal will be spotted. That doesn't sound like... I know the ancients knew many things that we don't. I still don't know how they built the pyramids. Many of those things are beyond me and us. Maybe it's some true ancient thing that they knew back then with breeding that we have lost. However, it sounds more like I said, like an old wives' tale, like an ancient superstition that God chose to honor. So the way I kind of take it is, okay, he's doing some practice, some farming practice that made sense to them back then. He's doing his best. He's doing what he knows how to do, even if it's not perfect. And God still blessed him. That's how I take it. But you could also just fully assume that Jacob knows something about animal husbandry that we don't, because despite what you may think, I know shockingly little about animal husbandry. So there's always a chance, but we have no good scientific explanation as to how this is coming about. It seems to me that basically God blessed the means that Jacob knew of, if we can put it that way. But it is strange. I did want to throw it out there. Usually if it's strange, it's worth talking about in the Bible. We good with that? Anything else on that? Yeah, he was talking about leaving shortly after the birth of Joseph. I would say he's probably there for some more years. Yeah. Animals can breed quickly, but you still need long. They still have cattle still has long birthing periods, so must be taking a minute. I guess we can keep an eye out for time markers of anything like that, but so he is using this, and God is using this to increase his wealth and standing. Okay. Yeah, we're going to read that, so we'll keep an eye out for it. Yeah. Okay, so Jacob now has his 11 sons. He's gaining wealth. And now we're going to look at his flight. Okay. Genesis 31. Genesis 31:1. And he heard the words of Laban's sons, saying, Jacob hath taken away all that was our father's, and of that which was our father's hath he gotten all his glory. And Jacob beheld the countenance of Laban, and behold, it was not toward him as before. The Lord said unto Jacob, Return unto the land of thy fathers, and to thy kindred, and I will be with thee. Jacob sent and called Rachel and Leah to the field unto his flock. And he said unto them, I see your father's countenance, that he is not toward me as before, but the God of my father has been with me. And ye know that with all my power I have served your father. And your father has deceived me, and changed my wages 10 times, but God suffered him not to hurt me. And he said thus, if he said thus, the speckled shall be thy wages, then all the cattle bear speckled. And if he said thus, the ring-straked shall be thy hire, then bear all the cattle ring-straked. Thus God hath taken away the cattle of your father, and given them to me. And it came to pass at the time that the cattle conceived, that I lifted up my eyes and saw in a dream, and behold, the rams which leaped upon the cattle were ring-straked, speckled, and grizzled. And the angel of God spoke unto me in a dream, saying, Jacob. And I said, Here am I. And he said, Lift up now thine eyes, and see, all the rams which leap upon the cattle are ring-straked, speckled, and grizzled. For I have seen all that Laban doeth unto thee. I am the God of Bethel, where thou anointest the pillar, where thou vowest a vow unto me. Now arise, get thee out from this land, and return unto the land of thy kindred. And Rachel and Leah answered and said unto him, Is there yet any portion or inheritance for us in our father's house? Are we not counted of him as strangers? For he has sold us, and hath quite devoured also our money. For all the riches which God hath taken from our father, that is ours and our children's now, then whatsoever God said unto thee, do. Then Jacob rose up, and set his sons and his wives upon his camels, and he carried away all his cattle and all his goods which he had gotten, the cattle of his getting, which he had gotten in Paddan Aram, for to go to Isaac his father in the land of Canaan. And Laban went to shear his sheep, and Rachel had stolen the images that were his father's. And Jacob stole away unawares to Laban the Syrian, in that he told him not that he fled. So he fled with all that he had, and rose up and passed over the river and set his face toward Mount Gilead. We're going to stop there for now. Okay, opening thoughts? What jumps out at you? Yeah, you know what, that probably, usually it would be the angel of the Lord, that particular phrase, but you are probably right here, because yeah, the angel is talking, does seem to be speaking to him, and then in the first person says, I am the God of Bethel, so yeah, it could very well be something like that. Oh yeah, it's a good amount of land. Yeah, I don't think we read it, but when Jacob goes to start taking care of things, I think he goes like a few days, like maybe 3 days journey away.
I was surprised that Laban didn't know.
Yeah. Yeah, it's going to take him a minute to realize he's gone.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and also like the way cattle worked in a lot of those areas, it's like, okay, maybe you have like a plot of land that is exclusively obviously yours, but then there's just a lot of open grazing land. So you could be a day or two away, and it may not technically be yours exclusively, but it's just kind of open land.
Can you find images for me? Rachel stole.
Can I define images?
Rachel stole Laban's images. So
Yeah.
he couldn't shear the sheep.
Yeah.
What is that?
Yeah, what is that? No, I mean, so, yeah, verse 19, what?
No, he's asking
Yeah, I'm asking the class. On my notes, I have stolen images. I mean, I just took that to mean he's not in the house. Laban went out to shear the sheep. That could be right as well. I just didn't take it that way. But yeah, so
Yeah, 'cause that was his big deal, right? Later, he wants them back.
right. Yeah, we'll talk about it. Yeah, it's interesting. And we've talked a little bit about, as they're talking about, like Isaac's servant was praising the God of his master. And there was, like, even the way Jacob talks about God, it's still the God of his father. He hasn't quite yet made God his God. So even Laban at different points has fully acknowledged the blessing of Yahweh, the God of Abraham, but he fully admits and acknowledges these other deities of some kind. So they would typically have small statues of a possible bunch of different things. So if he just worships another god, just some like Chaldean god, he could have an image of that god. You could also have images of ancestors. Their ancestor worship is common across almost every ancient culture. You could have, it depends on what outcome you're looking to get. So you could, maybe there's some chief Chaldean deity that he pays just general honor and respect to, but then there's a patron god of cattle, of sheep, of this, of that, or like I said, it could be honoring the ancestors or any number of things. But Rachel goes out of her way to take these images. So we'll talk more about that later. But yeah, anything else from the text before I say a few things? Yeah. So he's been doing this cattle thing probably at least roughly 6 years, maybe less. Depends on how long between working off his dowry to Rachel and then however long. So he sees that the tides have been turning, and because of the way he explains it to his wives, that, okay, so when Laban said, okay, any spotted cattle that are produced are yours, the flock would produce a lot of spotted cattle, and he would say, oh no, let's change it. Let's say anything that comes out like oddly striped. Then all the flocks were regularly producing striped cattle. So Jacob is just increasing and Laban's portion is decreasing. So we haven't really heard much about Laban's sons, but they're around apparently, and they aren't happy about the situation. To them, it looks like Jacob is just kind of walking off with all their father's cattle. So the sons aren't happy, Laban isn't happy. Okay, so we get the main thrust of the story. I do just want to point out one interesting little thing here, just about the way the Bible uses text sometimes. Okay, so verse 3, the Lord said unto Jacob, return unto the land of thy fathers and to thy kindred, and I will be with thee. Okay, very simple verse. Now, if the story cut off there, you'd think, okay, so what happened to Jacob? God came to him and said, return, I'll be with you. But then we see verses 10 through 13, and we don't need to reread the whole thing. But it came to pass at that time that the cattle conceived, I lifted up my eyes, saw in a dream, and behold, and then he explains this very odd visionary scenario. He calls it a dream, but I think based on the context, it's probably something more of like a vision. Like they would call them like waking dreams sometimes. So, and even what God ends up saying to him in verse 13, says, I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed the pillar, where thou vowest the vow. Now arise, get thee out of the land, return to the land. So you see a very truncated version of what happened in verse 3, and then you see an expanded version of it in his conversation with Leah and Rachel. So that's something called telescoping. So it's the idea that you can zoom in or zoom out of the same situation. And I just want to point this kind of stuff out because it's very clear in this chapter that that's what's happening. It's not two different it's not two different experiences that he had. You see just a very quick blip of it in verse 3, and then an expanded version of it in verses 10 through 13. Because sometimes this can trip us up as we compare different things in the Bible. Okay, so especially from a critic standpoint, people will often be like, oh, you know what, these two accounts don't match up. There's all this extra stuff in here, and the Bible can do this within the space of a few verses, that just because something is given less detail or told just quickly or in synopsis form here, it can be expanded to whatever extent over here. And it's talking about the same thing, and we can easily understand that, especially in a passage like this. I just want to point it out as a biblical literary device that you have these instances of the same event told to basically greater or lesser detail, but we understand them to be talking about the same thing and not in any way in conflict. Well, so it's the same idea going on. So you can probably talk about it in two different forms, like within, one author, one chapter, but then it gets used as people criticize the Gospels a lot, because especially the first three are detailing the same events basically in very similar order. And you go, oh, you know what, Mark said that, like, especially if you're talking about that kind of stuff, Mark is very brief, he's action-based, and it's just very quick. And then Matthew, or especially Luke, might expand this thing out to be, almost half a chapter, what Luke did in 3 verses.
Yeah, I just didn't know if they were personality traits or telescoping purpose.
No, I don't think it's on purpose. Like, I don't think Luke was sitting there going, oh, you know what, Mark didn't give enough detail on this, I'm going to do my thing. But it's the same principle, where we don't need to consider them in conflict just because one person or in one area of the Bible there's an expanded view and a shorter view over here. So the same principle applies. Yeah. And sometimes, especially when it is within one book, one author, then, you didn't need it twice in full. And we had the same thing in certain, I'm not coming up with the example right now, but there will be examples where, like, this whole long event happens, and then it's like, and Jacob told him everything that happened. And they just leave it at that because you don't need to hear it again. And then sometimes for purposes of repetition, you're like, yeah, I know all this happened. I just read this, but different things going on at different points. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and a book like Kings versus Chronicles is very interesting because you then end up seeing the purposes of each of the authors. So, like, the book of Kings is all about, it's clearly written, or at least finished, in the Babylonian captivity, because the last thing that happens is they all get carried off to Babylon. The Chronicles is after that, because it ends with them basically about to come back. So you see, in Kings, it's all about how did we get here? How did we get judgment? And then afterwards, it's how do we get redemption? So, like, you'll see dueling stories where one is all about the judgment, all about the negative. And then in Chronicles, they show you the bits of redemption and forgiveness throughout a king's life that wasn't highlighted before. But yeah, we're getting off topic. But I just wanted to point this interesting little device out in the text and kind of show you how this is done without things being in contradiction. Okay, so yeah, Leah and Rachel, despite their many issues, are in full agreement on this point. I find that very interesting. We already talked about the stolen images. They could have been images of gods, land spirits, ancestors, anything like that. So Jacob leaves, and it takes Laban 3 days to notice. And he's told, and Laban starts chasing after him, and it takes him a week to catch up. So Jacob's been on the run for 10 days by the time Laban catches up with him. So still in Genesis 31, we're just going to look at a few verses. Go to verse 25. Genesis 31:25. Then Laban overtook Jacob. Now Jacob had pitched his tent in the mount, and Laban with his brethren pitched in Mount of Gilead. Laban said unto Jacob, What hast thou done, that thou hast stolen away unawares to me, and carried away my daughters as captives taken with the sword? Wherefore didst thou flee away secretly, and steal away from me, and didst not tell me that I might have sent thee away with mirth, and with song, with tabret, and with harp? And hast thou not suffered me to kiss my sons, my daughters? Thou hast now done foolishly in so doing. It is in the power of my hand to do you hurt, but the God of your father spoke unto me yesternight, saying, Take thou heed that thou speak not to Jacob either good or bad. And now, though thou wouldst needs be gone, because thou sore longest after thy father's house, yet wherefore hast thou stolen my gods? All right, we're going to stop there. In a minute, we'll be in the book, just to get recap of a few things that are going to happen. Just based on those 6 verses, how do you feel about Laban? Yeah, it's weird because I think, so the fact that Jacob did what he did tells you that he was concerned that he wouldn't be free to go peaceably. That being said, Laban has a bit of a point. Like, okay, you just disappeared. It's like he just up and left, didn't say a word, took everything with him, they're his wives, but they are Laban's daughters. He took all of Laban's grandchildren. They're his, but he just vanished without a trace, never to come back. And his gods were stolen. Now, I think that's just the cherry on top, but so I don't trust Laban as far as I can throw him. But once again, Jacob is not entirely right in how he's going about anything. We have this pattern of character from Jacob, like when he was dealing with Esau. The promise and the birthright were supposed to be his, but he stole them. God told him to go home, and he did it in this very sketchy way. So I think we're in another one of those scenarios where there's no right character here. There's no fully right person in the story. Okay. Look in your workbook, top of page 108. This will just get us through a little bit of the story. Top of page 108, paragraph starts with, Jacob, not knowing Rachel had taken the gods, told Laban he could search the tents for them and kill the person who took them. Rachel hid the idols in a camel's saddle and then sat on them. Laban didn't ask her to get up. When the idols didn't turn up, Jacob rebuked Laban and reiterated how he had so faithfully served Laban for 20 years, even though Laban had been unfair with Jacob. Jacob credited God, the one of Isaac who causes fear, with keeping him from losing everything at Laban's hand. Okay. There's a little more to that story, but it's not the biggest deal. Okay. Let's look at verses 44 through 55. So 44 through the end of the chapter. Okay, so they've been fighting a little bit. Verse 44. Now therefore, come thou, let us make a covenant, I and thou, and let it be for a witness between me and thee. Jacob took a stone and set it up for a pillar. And Jacob said unto his brethren, Gather stones. And they took stones and made a heap, and they did eat there upon the heap. Laban called it Jegar-sahadutha, but Jacob called it Gilead. And Laban said, This heap is a witness between me and thee this day. Therefore was the name of it called Gilead. And Mizpah, for he said, The Lord watch between me and thee when we are absent from one another. If thou shalt afflict my daughters, or if thou shalt take other wives besides my daughters, no man is with us. See, God is witness betwixt me and thee. And Laban said to Jacob, Behold this heap, and behold this pillar which I have cast betwixt me and thee. This heap be witness, and this pillar be witness, that I will not pass over this heap to thee, and thou shalt not pass over this heap and this pillar unto me for harm. The God of Abraham, the God of Nahor, the God of their father, judge betwixt us. And Jacob sware by the fear of his father Isaac. Then Jacob offered sacrifice upon the mount, and called his brethren to eat bread. And they did eat bread, and tarried all night in the mount. And early in the morning Laban rose up, and kissed his sons and his daughters, and blessed them. And Laban departed, and returned unto his place. All right, what do you think about that? This will be the last thing I think we'll have time to talk about. Yet you get a lot of altars and memorial stones throughout the Bible. We've had every patriarch has made some sort of altar that we've had so far. In the wilderness wanderings, they marked certain things. Joshua marked certain things. Samuel marks certain things, certain victories, certain things that God has done. They're interestingly all throughout the Bible. Information that you're going to forget, but verse 47, the name of this pillar, this heap of stones. Verse 47, Laban called it Jegar-sahadutha, but Jacob called it Gilead. These words mean the exact same thing. It's basically like stone of witness or heap of witness, of testimony, that kind of thing. Laban's is Chaldean, and Jacob's is some form of Hebrew, probably like a pre-Hebrew Semitic type thing, whatever they were speaking at the time. Verse 49, so it's also called Mizpah. Have you ever heard this word before? So it ends up being a couple different locations in the Holy Land. Have you heard that in any other context? What have you heard?
It's usually like a necklace or something like
Yeah.
that. It's, like a romantic or like an affectionate thing.
Yeah, so I thought this was hilarious. So there's this thing called Mizpah coins. And if you just do a quick search, you will see it's usually gold or silver necklace. It is 2 hearts that are overlapping with 2 separate chains. It's like cut in half. So usually for, like you were saying, like romantic, or I guess like sisters could, like something, probably won't have like 2 buddies, 2 guys like having this. But it's a coin, or it's a necklace that's two hearts linked together, and across it it's written the verse, "The Lord watch between me and thee while we are absent one another." And if you don't know any context, So this is very interesting. That's getting to what you're saying. So these Mizpah coins, they're several centuries old that they've been making these like necklaces. So, like 2 hearts, that verse is written across them, "The Lord watch between me and thee." And if you knew nothing, and maybe, a man and woman had 2 sides of this heart, you go, "Oh, that's such a nice concept," and they're brought together. So I found this write-up. So based on the verse, may the Lord watch between you and me when we are absent from one another. In this covenant, Laban expressed how suspicious he was of Jacob. The idea of Mizpah, watchtower, is, or watch, if you do wrong, God will see it, and may he punish you. In effect, this pillar of Mizpah meant, if you come over on my side of this line, the pact is void, and I will kill you. The covenant breaker would need God to take care of him, because the other would shoot to kill. Mizpah was never meant to be a nice sentiment, despite what a Mizpah coin shared between two people might say. And I thought that was fantastic. Yeah, it's an uneasy peace. And these, these type of covenants are not terribly uncommon. And we've seen a few of them already with different people. I think like Abraham with the Philistines, they make this an altar covenant type thing. And so what usually happens is you have terms of the covenant, two parties, and whatever the agreement is, they would typically call on whatever deities the parties believed in to bear witness, with the idea of, like, what you're agreeing to is, yeah, if you break this covenant, may this God judge you. So it's not a nice thing. It's like it's a tough piece, It's hey, yeah, if you break this covenant, your God will punish you. Your God will judge you with it. So they, at least, despite Laban's pagan tendencies, they can agree at least to have the Lord be judge between them and enforce this covenant. But yes, so we did not get to a few things tonight, a couple important things. I will have to figure out exactly how we make sure to finish up, because it's not like, one, I never wanted to stretch it into season 3, but there's not enough content to do something like that. We would just be like a week or two off. So
What are we left with?
So we need to finish up.
No, I meant week-wise. What week are we in?
We're on week 9.
At 13.
Yeah. So we have a few left.
Okay.
But yeah, we need to finish out Jacob's story, and then Joseph is a very large portion of the rest of the book. So I'll have to think about how we do that. But yeah, so tonight we saw the furtherance of Jacob's blessing. We see him gaining wealth after he had gained wives and children last week. And now he has cut ties with the land of the Chaldees, in a sense, and he is heading back to the promised land. So it's a pretty big deal. He's been away for 20 years. It's the land that he is promised by God from his father and from Abraham. So it's a big deal that he's back, and we're going to see a little bit of that play out next week. And hopefully we'll get past Jacob next week, but we'll have to see how we run it. All right, we're moving on Jacob, so we'll see what happens next week. We've got some important things to talk about. So, all right, let's close in prayer. Lord, we thank you for your word. We thank you that we can study it and attempt to understand it. Just pray that you would continue to help us understand what you have for us, just learning about who you are and what you've done in history, and just what it means for understanding who you are, how you are. I just pray that it would help us to understand you better and draw closer. Pray you'd be with us. Pray you'd bring us back safely next week. In your name, Jesus, I pray. Amen.